Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. The Penn State Bookstore, now in an expanded location at the Hub Robeson Center, improving the student experience at Penn State with philanthropic support for student causes throughout the university. PSECU, a credit union providing financial services to its members throughout Pennsylvania since 1934. More at psecu.com. And from viewers like you, thank you.
President Trump's recent executive orders have raised many questions about immigration. How are immigrants vetted? Who's affected? What does this mean for universities that enroll foreign students? In this edition of Digging Deeper, Penn State President Eric Barron will talk with Shova Sivaprasad Wadia. She's director of the Center for Immigrants' Rights Clinic at Penn State Law. They'll discuss U.S. immigration policy, the agencies that enforce it, and how it has changed under the new administration. I'll be back later on in the show to talk one-on-one with President Barron about his decision not to designate Penn State a sanctuary campus. Now, here's President Barron.
Shova, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a fascinating topic. So you came to the university in 2008 to start the Immigrants' Rights Clinic at Penn State Law. Describe the work of the clinic.
So the mission of the clinic is to prepare law students for the immigration field, to make them effective immigration advocates and lawyers. And one of my personal missions is to ensure that they understand the relationship between immigration policy, politics, and law. And so a lot of my own experience has informed the mission statement for this clinic. Mm-hmm. I practiced immigration law for several years, and after that worked as a lobbyist for an organization in DC called the National Immigration Forum. Uh-huh. And I learned just how important politics was to understanding how immigration policy and law works, and that the three really need each other. So that's one mission in the clinic. The students work on a range of projects and cases that could loosely fall into outreach and education, representation, and policy work.
And could I find such clinics all over the country in universities, or are they a rarity?
You can find immigration clinics at nearly every major law school in the country. Some focus on one particular area of immigration law, so it's not uncommon for a clinic to only do asylum cases, for example. I'd like to think that the clinic here at Penn State Law is a bit unique, right, in that we do a bit of everything. And when I started the clinic, it was 100% policy. So I think we've really evolved in many ways.
To a much broader scope, yeah.
Because, and a part of it has to do with the need in our community, as well as my own awareness and knowledge of what those needs are.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about policy and immigration and that process. Who's in charge of setting the rules, and what agencies enforce the rules?
So the primary source of law for immigration is called the Immigration and Nationality Act. It rivals the U.S. tax code in complication.
Wow.
It was passed by Congress in 1952, and it has been amended several times since, after 1996, for example, following 9/11 as another example. So if you look at the first section of the Immigration and Nationality Act, you'll see that Congress has delegated to the Department of Homeland Security several responsibilities over immigration. So there are several federal agencies in the executive branch responsible for carrying out immigration, and the Department of Homeland Security is at the helm, if you will. When the old immigration agency was abolished, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, that's the agency I used to practice before. The Congress was quick, which is hard to believe today, to create this new cabinet-level agency called DHS. And DHS has several components that have a piece of immigration, but the three primary ones are Customs Border Protection, Immigration Customs Enforcement, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services.
And all three come under Homeland Security?
Yes.
Yeah. And so now President Trump has issued 2 executive orders. What are the implications of those orders for people trying to come to the U.S.?
So the week of January 22nd, President Trump signed 3 executive orders. One pertained to a travel ban. It's the one that has received the most buzz, if you will, especially in university towns and communities. The first version of this executive order suspended entry for any national from 7 designated countries, all of which were Muslim majority. The same order also would have suspended the refugee admissions program for a period of 120 days and slashed the total number of refugees for the fiscal year from 110,000 to 50,000. So these are just some of the pieces of that particular executive order. After a lot of litigation and courtroom traffic, President Trump went back to the drawing board, and on March 6th, the first day of our spring break, signed a new or revised executive order. I think his goal was to avoid legal conflict or courtroom traffic, but that too was unavoidable with this new executive order. In my own opinion, it does much of the same as the first by suspending entry for people from Muslim-majority countries, by suspending our refugee program, and by doing so without a rational basis. There were 2 other executive orders that were signed by the president that are worth noting surrounding enforcement. One as it relates to enforcement at the border, and the other as it relates to enforcement on the interior. Who are we going to target for removal? How is that process going to look? Who should be a priority? And so on.
You made a comment that universities look at this very, very seriously for lots of reasons. What do you see as the impact on Penn State students?
I see the impact as significant, emotional, to some extent psychological. In the hours after the first executive order was signed, I was up for many hours and many days fielding calls and concerns from not only affected students, but members in our community. So I think there's a real concern and then also a lot of misinformation. And so I felt much of my role and responsibility was to get as much accurate information out there. So the first information session we held was on February 3rd, and we had more than 200 people in 2 overflow rooms because of the many questions. And some of it goes back to the basics, right? What is the role of an executive order? Can it be above the Constitution? What about Congress? What about dual nationals? So answering basic questions, but also being able to explain the relationship between an executive order and the law.
And so you say here's a psychological impact and a lot of concern and consternation. If you looked at it from the side of the practical implications, the legal implications, what exactly are they?
So the legal implications, I think, are several. The executive order relating to the ban in particular raises constitutional questions, for example. Does a restriction or suspension for nationals from countries, all of which enjoy Muslim populations of over 90%, constitute a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to our Constitution? At the heart of the Establishment Clause is this idea that the government will not favor one religion over another. And so what we've seen in the courts almost 4-0, if not more, 4 being for the Constitution and 0 being for our president, is that there has been a religious animus behind these executive orders, both with the first and with the second. And in many cases, the judges have looked at the sequence of events that began well before Election Day, with the statements made by the president for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering our country, softening it by excluding the word Muslim from an executive order doesn't necessarily satisfy the test for whether or not the Establishment Clause has been violated.
So here is this very broad and constitutional issues, and here's this discussion about much deeper vetting process.
So in looking at the individual, let's take refugees as one example, because one controversial portion of this executive order is to suspend our entire refugee program. One course I teach at Penn State Law is asylum and refugee law. And refugees are among the most screened populations before they even enter the United States. So I will say with confidence that our refugee program is maybe the last that a future terrorist might use to enter and reside in the United States.
And the reason?
The reason being that not only are there multiple security checks outside the U.S. before the refugee is admitted, but each refugee also has to meet a rigorous definition. The legal definition of a refugee is any person who has suffered persecution or will face persecution in the future on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. That persecution has to be by the government or by a group that the government is unwilling or unable to control. So just as a legal matter, our U.S. refugee and asylum system does not absorb every person who is fleeing civil conflict or a private dispute. There is a very specific definition, and there are limited allocations given each year.
So we already have a very strong
We do.
process.
And if we were to go to those who are or would have been affected by the Muslim or travel ban, if you take the example of a student, that student has to apply, has to meet the requirements for an F1 non-immigrant status, show that he or she does not have a home that he or she intends to abandon, go to a consulate and go through an interview and receive a visa, show that he or she is not inadmissible to the United States. And even after the student in waiting arrives at CBP, the Customs Border Protection has the choice to turn that person away. So there are many checks in the system before the student even arrives in the U.S. and even at the point of arrival.
You know, we see this as an international discussion, Australia, Germany. So how is it decided who's going where?
So the refugee numbers
Right.
are set by the president in consultation with agencies and Congress each year. Most of the referrals are made by UNHCR as it relates to the refugees who are admitted here. If you are already here, so let's assume I am a student at Penn State, I'm from Syria, I fear return, severe things have happened to my family, and when I'm done or during my studies, I have a genuine fear of returning home because I believe I will be persecuted by my government. In that case, the student will apply for asylum. And asylum is a remedy available to people who are already in the United States. So they're physically present. They too have to satisfy this refugee definition that I referenced earlier. But the U.S. law makes a distinction between an individual outside the U.S. who is admitted as a refugee versus somebody who is already here, who applies for asylum, but still has to satisfy the refugee definition.
How are green card holders affected in this process?
So in the general world of immigration law, there are 4 ways that someone can acquire lawful permanent residence or a green card. One is through family. So if we look at that Immigration and Nationality Act I mentioned, Congress passed, you will see that the largest allocation of visas is to our family immigration system. So we see a real value for family relationships from the beginning of when the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed. A second large category and way in which someone can acquire green card status is through employment. So a relationship between the foreign national and a U.S. employer. Microsoft, for example, sponsoring an aspiring foreign national who has excelled in his or her field. A third way is as a refugee. So if you are admitted as a refugee or if you are granted asylum, after a year, you have the opportunity to apply for a green card. And then finally, we have a diversity program. There are fewer visas allocated for that program. It literally operates as a lottery, and it is aimed at enabling individuals from countries where we have not typically taken a large share of immigrants to receive a green card.
So another issue that we frequently are hearing about are the number of illegal immigrants. And so how does an illegal immigrant gain entry into the country? And is there sort of a mixture in the language people are using between someone who's viewed as a dreamer and someone who's viewed as an illegal immigrant?
You hit on a great question, and that, if we take a step back, relates to terminology.
Yeah.
So the first conversation I have with my immigration law class is about terminology. And I ask students, alien is in the Immigration and Nationality Act. An alien is defined as anyone who is not a national or citizen of the United States. How does that make you feel? Right? So that I can...
Like from Mars.
I get responses like from Mars or a UFO or I feel unwelcome, right? We might think about the ways in which our laws and policies already make people feel unwelcome and how that's been even heightened in this new administration. So alien is defined in the Immigration and Nationality Act. I don't use that term. I prefer the term non-citizen. I also avoid the term illegal immigration, illegal alien, for a few reasons. We don't call somebody who drives past the speed limit illegal, right? And so sometimes when the term is used, especially in popular conversation, the term illegal immigration or illegal alien doesn't just punish the act, right? It punishes and criminalizes the entire person. And that in itself can be dehumanizing. A legal reason why I might avoid that term is that status is constantly changing. So it is quite possible for someone to have entered the United States without inspection and today have U.S. citizenship. And so this idea that someone has a status that they started with that is frozen in time is just inaccurate. In terms of who is in our undocumented population, a term I prefer to use, we have about 11.2 million people living in the United States without papers. It is a common myth that all of those individuals may have crossed over the border or climbed a wall that the president wants to extend. But the reality is that many people who are living in the United States without documentation came in the United States with a valid visa, and that visa subsequently overstayed. So when I hear conversations about the wall, in addition to the policy concerns, I also just think about the accuracy of, does that person understand how the vast majority of people in the U.S. today are even without authorization? It's not through crossing the border without inspection.
So there are actually multiple levels here, including someone who came as a child and has gone through elementary school, high school, graduated, and...
Yeah, and Dreamers has become sort of a common expression for the individual who came in as a young child. The DREAM Act is a piece of legislation that's been introduced in several Congresses that would provide a durable status for certain individuals who came in as children and are in school and contributing in meaningful ways. And then, of course, and you've spoken defensively and in support of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is a program that was announced in 2012 by former President Barack Obama. More than 750,000 young people have benefited from DACA, and it pertains or extends to individuals who came to the United States before the age of 16, have the requisite ties to the U.S., are in school or have graduated. And we've seen so many benefits out of the DACA program.
Yeah, I agree. So fascinating topic, incredibly complicated topic. If you just had a bit of advice for our students who were concerned or wrestling with these issues, what would it be?
Learn the basics of immigration law and policy. We can't explain immigration policy in a soundbite. So if anyone tries to,
it just comes off wrong.
It may not be the best view. Get to know someone who is from outside your culture or has gone through the immigration process. If you are the child of immigrants, I'm the child of immigrant parents, learn their story. It can open doors and windows to even what the immigration process looked like 40 years ago and what it looks like today. And have compassion.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating talking to you.
Thank you for
Appreciate
having me.
Next up on Digging Deeper, I'll talk one-on-one with President Barron about the impact President Trump's executive orders are having on colleges and universities, about the future of climate science research at Penn State, and more. In a statement released in January, you announced that Penn State would not label itself a sanctuary campus, noting that the term sanctuary campus is too ambiguous. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you made that decision?
Yeah, so, very simply, we accept students from all over the world. We accept them because they're accomplished and bright and are coming here and paying tuition to have access to what I think is a great education. And we treat them as individuals and we treat them as accomplished individuals. That's the way a university environment should be. Now to take a step and say, okay, we will choose to be a sanctuary campus. First of all, I don't know what the word means, and I think people can interpret it different ways, and that in itself makes the terminology a little bit different, a little bit difficult, because if one person's looking at it and saying, aha, that means they're going to break the law. They're going to defy federal law. When somebody else looks at it and may look at it as, okay, you are going to be a supportive environment. You're going to make sure that this is a place where you can be valued as an individual and for your contribution. So as soon as the word has multiple interpretations and a big range like that, it doesn't have that same value. Now, as part of being a law-abiding institution, one of the things we do is protect student information and student rights. It's called FERPA, and we take that very seriously. And we view a residence hall room as the residence of an individual, and you have certain rights that are protected under law, and we respect that. And similarly, if someone came up with a subpoena, we would respect the law. And so I would say here's an institution that values the individuals and wants them to be successful, and at the same time, we pay attention to the law.
Along with the travel ban, the Trump administration has also announced plans to cut the EPA's budget by 31%. Now, this and other moves by the administration have scientists around the country scrambling to protect and preserve research, decades of research that have since become basically unavailable and are off official White House websites. So how concerned are you and the faculty at the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences about the Trump administration's actions regarding climate change?
Well, we're seeing a very broad discussion occur because of budget, which isn't just including including that very specific topic. We have at EPA, at NOAA, in agriculture, in access and affordability programs, in energy research. These are all areas incredibly important to a university. And because we're a keeper of knowledge, and we're also a creator of knowledge, and so that opportunity to explore, to understand, to educate becomes incredibly important. And that, frankly, is a budget that that in order to be balanced and support increases for defense, cuts a lot of those different programs. And I just think you just have to simply say this is not going to help universities be successful, and it's the major research universities of this country that have driven the economy of this country. So I think it will turn out to be, if enacted, it will turn out to be counterproductive.
Thank you, President Barron.
My pleasure.
On behalf of Penn State President Eric Barron, we'd like to thank our guest, Shobha Sivaprasad Wadia. She's director of the Center for Immigrants' Rights Clinic at Penn State Law. I'm Kayla Fish. Thanks for joining us.
Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. The Penn State Bookstore, now in an expanded location in the Hub Robeson Center, improving the student experience at Penn State with philanthropic support for student causes throughout the university. PSECU, a credit union providing financial services to its members throughout Pennsylvania since 1934. More at psecu.com. And from viewers like you, thank you.